Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live webinar today entitled Franciacorta in Focus. My name is Rob. I work for the WSET in the business development team. The WSET, as you may know, is the leading provider of wines, spirits, and sake qualifications. And for over 50 years, we have been providing education. Today in 2023, our qualifications are now available in 70 countries through a network of 800 course providers. So just a few pieces of housekeeping before we begin the webinar itself. First of which is to point out that this webinar will be recorded and will be uploaded to our WSET Global Events Hub on YouTube. So please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. This will enable you to see this webinar, but also all of the others in this series. As you will hopefully see, there's also a Q&A box. Please put as many questions as you have in that Q&A box throughout the webinar, and we will do our very best to cover as many as possible at the end. The last thing for me to say before I hand over is to introduce JC, who is going to be our speaker today. So JC was Franciacorta ambassador to Greater China for 10 years between 2011 and 2021. He has been one of our trusted certified educators with WSET since 2009, teaching in both Hong Kong and Italy. He is also a judge at the rigorous Decanter World Wine Awards in London. And for almost 30 years, he's been an entrepreneur in the export sector in China. And for obvious reasons, this has given him great and deep insights into the international trade. So without further ado, I will pass over to JC, who's going to talk to us about Franciacorta. I will now disappear, and I shall see you all at the end for hopefully plenty of Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. It's a real honor to be here and presenting the wines of Franciacorta, to have the opportunity to share with the community of WSET. It's important for me to say that the members of the consortium, and especially the president, the current president, Silvano Brescianini, strongly believe in the importance of wine education. And the president Brescianini called me this morning so that to make sure, so that on his behalf I could congratulate the WSET and all of you actually for your achievements worldwide. And on his behalf, congratulations. I am proud. This was actually tasting at the President Brescianini's winery in Franciacorta. I'm proud to be here presenting to the WSET community in the capacity of a WSET wine educator myself, also, as Rob mentioned, as a former brand ambassador of Franciacorta in Greater China, and someone who arranged for the consortium to become a bronze partner of the WSET, something that makes me very proud because the Franciacorta really believes in the great work that the WSET is doing. As Rob mentioned, my journey with wine started in 2006 in Hong Kong, where I began studying level 2. Eventually, I obtained my level 4 in 2009 and straight away became an educator and eventually obtained my APP. And today, I'm an approved program provider here in Italy, where I focused on working with Italian wine professionals to help them develop an international perspective on the wine trade. And I represent several consortia in Italy, in events in Italy, but also worldwide. So it's a great opportunity for me. You can hear my French accent, but I'm actually Quebecois. I'm from Montreal. I was born and raised in Montreal, and I moved to Hong Kong when I was only 23 years old. And now I've lived in Italy for almost 3 years now. So in this session, I aim to focus on the factors that influence the style and the quality of Franciacorta, so that you can have a clear idea of what to expect from this up-and-coming wine region. And you will understand later why I'm saying up-and-coming. And my aim is also perhaps to dispel some of the misconceptions that I feel exists today in the mind of certain wine lovers and also certain wine professionals. And so these are my objectives with this session. When I teach WSET courses, for all of you who are educators here, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. And I think the students very well will also understand. As an educator, we always say that wine comes from three factors: the grapevine, the grape varieties, the ripening conditions, and the human factors. And for me, since I relocated to Italy, being surrounded with so much history, being surrounded with monuments, statues, buildings, the landscape is so different than what I experienced in Hong Kong. So I became very, very aware and very sensitive to history. And so I would like to start with the human contribution to the area of Franciacorta. And first, we speak about a few key dates, important dates. Basically, in the minds of many, Franciacorta is a young wine region. And in fact, this is a region that some producers in the area say we are only 50, 55 years old. And so we are very young as a wine region, but the region itself has a very long history of viticulture, of winemaking. And it demonstrates, this long history demonstrates that in fact, the region has survived the test of time. And when I say this expression, surviving the test of time, I'm trying to demonstrate that we can consider Franciacorta a noble wine region today. Already in the 11th century, there were vineyards around Franciacorta, and the region was of especially sensitive and critical strategic importance in the area, because it was at the crossroad of several trade routes from east to west, from north to south, and especially trading with Germany and the countries further north. And so it was very difficult to find somebody who was willing to manage that critical area. And the Cistercian monks were actually convinced with a motivation, with an incentive. And this incentive was actually the exemption from paying taxes. And why I'm talking about this, because their monasteries were declared Franciacortas. Obviously, my accent is not very good. Even when I speak in English, my accent is a bit strange, but what it means, Franciacortas, it actually means tax-free. And it was documented in the 13th century, more precisely in 1277. It was documented in Brescia that the region was called Franciacorta. So this is where the name of the region comes from. It doesn't come from France, short France, because Corta is short, Francia, France. No, it doesn't have any relationship whatsoever with France. Franciacorta means tax-free zone, and this is where the name comes from. Over the centuries, the land has shown it's particularly well adapted to viticulture, so that by 1809, there were already 1,000 hectares planted with grapevine in that area, which is quite impressive. And this is documented in some Napoleonic registry, and we can see this today. In 1961, Franco Zigliani, a very important character, a very important person for the region of Franciacorta, created the first wine made in the traditional method, and he called that wine Pinot di Franciacorta. And really, this was the beginning of the search, the quest to make the best possible quality traditional method sparkling wine. And in '67, the region was awarded DOC. And in 1995, Franciacorta was recognized as the first DOCG wine region of Italy that was making wine in the sparkling wine method, in the traditional method. And this was a very important recognition already in 1995 that the quality potential was very high for its sparkling wine made in the traditional method. Today, what is Franciacorta? Is 55% certified organic. It is 122 wineries. The vast majority of these wineries would be called in French récoltant manipulant. In English, we say grower Franciacorta, basically. I would say the vast majority, we're talking more than 80% of the producers today have this status. Why I said up and coming region? Because it only makes 20 million bottles. Franciacorta is tiny. I always say that Franciacorta is a wine of allocation. It's a wine of niche, a niche product compared to, let's say, the production of champagne or the production of other large wine regions. But the most amazing thing is that today Franciacorta only export 11.5% of its production, which is tiny in terms of export. And this is why we can barely find it in several markets around the world. And now the consortium is spending a lot of effort, a lot of energy to develop the export market. And so when I say it's up and coming, because I think in America, I think in the UK market, in several markets of the world, we're going to see more and more Franciacorta. And this is really an exciting development because the wine is really stunning quality. So this is the human contribution. Later, we will speak about the human factor of winemaking. But first, let's talk about the ripening conditions. And for that, to introduce the ripening conditions, we have a beautiful video, and I will play it here. A video that will give us a very good summary of those ripening conditions that I'm talking about. Let me see. Good. So this video, for me, I really like it that we see so well the topography. We can see so well also the importance of the lake in that region, and also how the lake extends to a valley that is called the Val Camonica Valley. In fact, what we learned from this video is just like the best terroirs in the world, and thanks to a geology formed from the retreat of the glaciers 10,000 years ago, we could see that the area has much diversity in terms of soil types, in terms of exposures, in terms of altitude, patterns of precipitations, patterns of temperature influences. And in fact, I don't know if you have noticed, but part of the video shows the temperature, and we could see that the vast majority of the area was colored in yellow. The yellow color represents the Winkler index that is actually the same as the one we find in Champagne. And this is a very interesting information, because most people think that Franciacorta is actually much warmer than Champagne, when actually most of the region is actually as cool as Franciacorta, as Champagne, as the same sort of temperature, and some areas of Franciacorta are even colder than what you find in Champagne. And so this is also something that I would like to talk about. Another thing that is quite interesting is the heterogeneity of the different factors that we find in the area. And this heterogeneity, the fact that we have so much diversity, creates a key contribution to obtaining wines of great complexity. As you know very well, the art of blending that we find in the traditional method wines are a key element that makes these wines so fascinating. And so here in Franciacorta, since we have many different possibilities, we can find components here, we can find components there, that provides the final blend, something that is actually quite fascinating. But key to the area is the Lake of Iseo, this beautiful lake actually, and we can see from this picture, in the background of this picture in front of us now, we can see the lake. And this is a really key influence, because it helps to mitigate temperatures in the winter and in the spring. So it protects the area against damaging frosts. And in the summer, the lake, together with the Val Camonica Valley that is at the north of the lake, brings an important cooling influence to the area. Not only it creates a wide diurnal range, the temperature between night and day, but it's also generating early evening winds. And these winds help the area have a lower disease pressure. And this is very important for sparkling wine, because botrytis is a killer of bubbles. And so therefore in this area, thanks to these early evening winds, we have less disease pressure actually. That contributes to enhanced quality and also enhanced precision of style. This map shows the complexity of the soil types that we find in the area, and the video was showing beautifully how all these are located, these are positioned, but now we can see very well. And what we could see here also on this map is the delineation of the region to the west, thanks to the Olio River. To the northeast, where I'm pointing now with this arrow, we have the extension of the Rhaetian Alps, actually. And this area of Franciacorta that now I'm circling with the arrow is actually quite high in altitude. And this area can be quite cold, in fact, perhaps even colder than Champagne, as I mentioned earlier. And then in the south, we have Monte Orfano. This Monte Orfano is a very interesting small hill, actually, that sort of keeps everything all the effect coming from the lake, all these winds coming from the lake, all this cool influence coming from the Alps are sort of kept in this sort of amphitheater that we see here. And this is quite interesting in terms of situation. The great majority of the vineyards are planted at an altitude of 160 meters, which is actually an interesting factor, because every time we think of a lake, we always think that the lake should be at the same level of altitude as the sea. But no, actually, because the lake of Iseo is actually at altitude itself. The maximum altitude that we have here is 500 meters in total, and 500 meters altitude is the maximum limit allowed by the regulation of Franciacorta. So at this moment, it's not allowed to plant higher than 500 meters of altitude. So these soil types and these different altitude levels and vineyards being located all over the area, and we could see that it's really providing this diversity that we were talking about earlier, which is quite impressive. Now, I'm going to show you this slide very quickly. So I don't want to go into the details of this slide because it contains too much information for this presentation. But so now is the time that if you have a phone, you want to take a photo, because I think it's a very interesting table. Basically, it shows the soil types that we find in Franciacorta today. There are 6 major soil groups, and the fact that we have so many soil groups in the area, and we saw in the previous map in the different colors where they are located, this is a further example of how it gives great variability, great options for producers to have available for them, fundamental for the complexity of the wines, but also for the balance of the wine. And so this particular table, we could see how different soil affect the growth of the vine. So a fine grain deposit, the vigor will be a little higher, obviously, than the shallow morainal soil, which is a low vigor. It also shows how grape musts are influenced by different soil types. So a fluvio-glacial soil will be later ripening, will have mid-acidity, mid-sugar. A shallow morainal soil will have a higher ripening potential with lower acidity and higher sugar. So we could see that each soil type obviously contributes differently to the grape must, and obviously to the sensory profile of the juice itself, and eventually the base wine. So now you could see 6 soil groups, and I return quickly to this soil map, and we could see that basically all these soil groups are pretty well, I would say, spread out into the region. In fact, what we find is that many producers like to have vineyards located in many different locations of the region in order for them to benefit from this this variability of soil groups that exist in the region. So we spoke about the ripening conditions, and now we are moving to the grape varieties, the grape varieties that are critical, fundamental to the style and the quality of the wine. And we could see the queen here, Chardonnay, in the larger picture. We could see Pinot Noir, that we call Pinot Nero, obviously in Italy. And then we could see also Pinot Bianco, and we could see Herba Mate on the lower right corner. Herba Mate, we will speak about it in the next slide. So these are the 4 grape varieties today allowed in Franciacorta to make the sparkling wine in a traditional method. So how do these grapes contribute to the wine? And this is very interesting. So when we spoke about ripening conditions, we saw that actually the ripening conditions are excellent. I mean, we find excellent conditions to obtain the optimal ripeness and the optimal health of the grapes in Franciacorta. So the area is well adapted. It has shown its the its survival to the test of time, and basically now how each grape behave. And this is very interesting because when we look at it, all grape varieties are early budding, okay? And so therefore there is a risk of frost when they are early budding. But in the area, we saw that we have the Lake of Iseo that provides a mitigating influence and so lowers the risk of frost. So this is an excellent situation for these grapes to remain healthy and not be affected so much by frost, especially in the spring when they are budding. Interestingly, all of these grape varieties, they also retain their acidity. Chardonnay is a grape that actually does not lose its acidity so quickly, and so Pinot Nero is the same thing. Pinot Bianco and Herba Mate especially. Herba Mate is a grape of high acidity that does not lose its acidity basically during the maturation process. So this is interesting, this fact, because obviously, Franciacorta's temperature in the summer can be warm sometimes in some areas of Franciacorta. And so we just have just about enough ripeness to be able to obtain, to avoid unripe flavors, actually. And we have cooling influence from the lake, from the Alps, so that the grape do not lose their ripeness, their freshness. And so here, all 4 grapes retain their acidity, but we have a cooling influence that not only retains the acidity, but favors the retaining of this acidity. So this is a very important double factors that really helps to obtain the optimal ripeness, the best possible fruit for making sparkling wine in the traditional method. Another thing that we see with regards to the autolysis, we know, it's very clear that we know that Chardonnay is highly compatible to the autolysis process, the aging on the lees. We also know that Pinot Nero is also compatible. But what we discover from this slide is that actually also Pinot Bianco, Pinot Blanc, and also Herba Mate is very compatible to the autolytic process. And so this is also an interesting fact. This last variety, the Herba Mate, actually is autochthonous, is native of Franciacorta. It was first documented in the 16th century. And today, several producers are experimenting with the grape. This experiment started several years ago, and they have tried to understand in which site it is best planted, when it is best to harvest this grape. And obviously, they have experimented with different wine production techniques. Is it better to age it in oak for some time? Should we use malolactic fermentation, etc.? So now they are using all these techniques. They are experimenting. They're trying to understand how best to optimize the Herba Mate in the blend of each cuvée. And in fact, the regulation of Franciacorta has started to allow the Herba Mate since 2017 vintage. And eventually, what is it hoped? It's hoped that Herba Mate, thanks to its high acidity, thanks to its ability to retain a high level of acidity, even during maturation, it will provide freshness and finesse to the final blend. And so this is what is being experimented today. And this is obviously important when we consider today what is going on with climate change and higher temperatures around the globe, but also obviously in Italy. And finally, this table shows us how much Chardonnay is planted. 80% of the total planting of the region is Chardonnay, 16% Pinot Nero, and only 3% Pinot Bianco, only 1% Herba Mate. So this is what we can see. So Chardonnay is still the queen, is still very important in the region. This is why I gave you a picture that was much larger than the others. before. If we look at the theory we learned, especially at level 4 with WSET, we learned that the key factors required from grape varieties to yield excellent quality sparkling wines, especially those made in the traditional method, there are three basically critical, absolutely critical, very important characteristic. First is their low intensity aroma. We need a kind of neutrality. And from this table, we see that all 4 grapes, including the herba mate, are rather neutral in terms of aromatic intensity. All the best sparkling wines made in the traditional methods, they also have, the grapes must also have an ability to retain acidity. Obviously, if we are going to do a second fermentation in bottle, we raise the level of alcohol. We need to have a base wine that is high in acidity to begin with, so that we can make sure to have as balanced a wine as possible. So here we could see that all 4 grape varieties, including Pinot Bianco and especially herba mate, retain their acidity very well. And finally, the third most critical factor is that all grapes must respond very well to autolysis, which is also the case of herba mate. So in Franciacorta, the grapes used, they use the grapes that are the most adapted to the traditional method of winemaking, and the grapes that are the most adapted to the area, the region of Franciacorta, and the ripening conditions that we can find there, thanks to the lake, the mountains, and also the influence from Italian summers. Now we are moving to the human factor of winemaking. And I will start with a little story. And I remember a story that was actually quite interesting for me, quite funny for me. I traveled to Franciacorta with a group of Hong Kong journalists several years ago. And we visited a producer called Ca del Bosco. And the owner, Maurizio Zanella, is a big man, a strong man, a man of a strong, powerful personality. So he was giving us the tour. And at some point we were analyzing and we were looking at the giant map of Franciacorta. And he asked everyone in the room, do you know what is Franciacorta? Obviously, he did it with an Italian accent, which I'm not able to do. And one journalist, thinking he was so clever, he responded, Franciacorta is a sparkling wine. Of course. And at that moment, Zanella looked at him with fire in his eyes and he says, no, Franciacorta is not a sparkling wine. And I was laughing because I felt in the same trap myself when I was doing my interview to convince the Zanella and the president and other people to become ambassador in Greater China. So this is why it was quite a moment of a recording for me. Because in Franciacorta, they believe that Franciacorta is Franciacorta. It's actually, in Europe, it is one of the very few appellations that the name and the region refers not only to the name of Franciacorta not only refers to a region, but it also refers to a production method. And here the production method is the traditional method of sparkling wine. So Franciacorta is Franciacorta. In fact, it's forbidden by the rules of the consortio to even mention sparkling wine on the label. It's forbidden to mention metodo classico or metodo tradizionale. It's also forbidden to write any mention of any commune, any village, any towns, and it's also forbidden to mention any vineyard name. It is possible to mention a fantasy name, but it's not possible to mention a vineyard, a town, or a commune, because Franciacorta is Franciacorta. And this is a very interesting point and very important aspect that producers in Franciacorta insists upon, as our friend Maurizio Zanella made clear during our visit. Here we could see the winemaking in Franciacorta. And in fact, some producers like to call this is the Franciacorta method. The method of production is the Franciacorta method. And some of you among the participants will have eagle eyes, I'm sure, and you will have noticed that the elaboration, the period of time the wine must spend on the lees is actually very high. And it's also very strict. The Franciacorta is a minimum of 18 months. We can see that Rosé is a minimum of 24 months. The vintage Franciacorta is a minimum of 30 months. And when we looked at Franciacorta Riserva is a minimum of 60 months. And these minimums are specified in the regulation. And this is a very important issue because around the world, not all regions actually specify the amount of the number of months for their vintage product or for their rosé product. But here in Franciacorta, we can see that the strictness of these regulations and also the fact that they are really trying to optimize the benefit and the influence from lees aging by specifying it very clearly and very strictly in the regulations. Another thing that we can see from this table, a beautiful table that gives us a quick picture of the situation, is the Satin typology, the category Satin. And this is a very interesting typology because we could see that it has less pressure compared to the other products. A traditional method wine will have about 6 atm of pressure, 5.5, 6 atm of pressure. But Franciacorta by law, by rule, must not have more than 5 atm of pressure. And in fact, most Satin in Franciacorta have no more than 4.5 bar atm of pressure. So this is a wine that is much more delicate, much more fine, much more gentle in terms of texture. And I remember in a market like Asia and China in particular, consumers there are very, very sensitive to the texture of the wine, especially in China. In China, when we think of it, many ingredients in the food in China are actually added to the dishes, not for their flavors or their aroma, but rather for the texture it provides to the dish. So something can be crunchy, something can be chewy. And so Chinese consumers in particular, but also I noticed this elsewhere in Asia, they're very, very sensitive to the texture. And therefore, Satin was appreciated a little bit more, generally speaking, than the other Franciacorta, because some consumers felt that it was more delicate and more gentle on the palate. And this presents opportunities that are quite interesting. Satin is also interesting in that it's only a Blanc de Blanc. It can be produced with Chardonnay and Pinot Bianco, but Herba Mate is not allowed in the Satin category. And also what we can see is that Satin is produced only in the Brut typology. But when we mention Brut in Franciacorta, we have to understand that naturally for them, it's easy to obtain wines with very low dosage, actually. We are talking about 1, 2, 3, 4 grams per liter. And this is quite common in Franciacorta. And we are going to see on the label the name Brut, even though the dosage could be called extra brut or brut nature. In Franciacorta, it is required by law, by the rules, that we put only brut on the label. And other than that, we could see that the Riserva is quite interesting because Riserva, as I mentioned, is 60 months on the lees. And basically the blend is the same as a Franciacorta, but all of these grapes must come from 85% at least of these grapes must come from the same vintage, and this is the key point for this. So basically what I was hoping to do with this presentation, and I hope I achieved my objective, was to show that Franciacorta is characterized by ripeness with acidity, with underline. So here it's true that we have ripeness in Franciacorta, but we have also acidity. In fact, wine after wine, we can feel the freshness of the wine. We can feel the freshness of the acidity. These wines are upright, they're structured. They're quite lean, actually. They're not, but yet they are muscular at the same time. For me, I always say that a Franciacorta is more a gymnast rather than a bodybuilder. So they have this energy and this leanness of structure, yet they are mouth-filling and well structured. So I believe that these wines are ideal for gastronomy, actually, because they provide enough substance to match with food, but also enough freshness to help clean the palate and keep everything very mouth-watering and lip-smacking going forward into the meal. So from this presentation, I hope that we understand why we have this beautiful ripeness with acidity, because we have optimal ripening conditions in Franciacorta. The lake and the Valley Valcamonica, they provide essential cooling influence so that the grape have all that they need to maintain their freshness, but at the same time, we can ripen the grape varieties fully, so that they can we can avoid unripe flavors in the blend, and we can maintain the natural high acidity of the grapes, so that we can make beautiful wines with very long aging on the lees, so that we can really elevate these wines to their highest expression and also a clear focus on the highest quality possible. And so, in a nutshell, in 45 minutes, this is basically what Franciacorta is about. And obviously, to know more about Franciacorta, you're invited to visit their website, franciacorta.wine. But most of all, if you can visit the area, it's a fantastic place to visit. First of all, it's very, very close to Bergamo, very easy to reach by the airport of Bergamo. It's also very close to Milan. It's only 1 hour from Milan by car. And by train, it's also very convenient because you can stop in Brescia. And from there is a very short drive from the train station. And the area is absolutely beautiful, stunning. We could see beautiful lake, we could see the mountains, and there are many beautiful restaurants to visit and enjoy a wonderful, wonderful time. So what is best? The best is to basically visit a place, enjoy the what it has to offer, and understand what this is about. So this concludes my presentation, and if you have questions, and I can see we have at least 23, 24 questions in the Q&A. So now I will try my best to answer all of your questions. Thank you. Thank you for your attention and interest in the wines of Franciacorta.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, JC. That's really insightful, and particularly the topography. It's a really interesting way of seeing the region in a different light. I hope everybody would agree with that. So yeah, as JC says, we do have quite a lot of questions, so I will do my best to go through as many as we possibly can. But obviously we are time pressed as well. So if I don't get around to yours, you know, please don't be offended. So the first question, Andrew asks JC, why the altitude limit and why is it so low? And just before you answer, if I can add to that, we had a very or fairly well-connected question from Mauricio, which said, are there any studies to suggest upcoming changes to the maximum altitude because of global warming, for example?
Okay. Obviously, as an ambassador, I know quite a lot of information, but there's also some technical aspect that I am not completely familiar with. So therefore, I will probably need to receive some emails or some messages and then refer them to the consortium, who will be able to provide more information. Why the altitudes are so low? Basically, 500 meters is not that low. Why? Because actually we have already a cooling influence coming from the Alps. We have this wind, this cold wind that is pushed throughout the early evenings that comes from the Alps, and so therefore going higher than 500 would be too cold, actually. And if it would be too cold, in that situation, we would have unripe flavors. And here in Franciacorta, this is what we want to avoid. We want to avoid these unripe flavors coming from basically grapes that are barely ripe to make the sparkling wine. So therefore, this would be the answer. And at 160 meters, obviously, we cannot go lower than that because this is basically where the region sits at. And so therefore, what we find there is between 160 and 500. As to the study, what was the question about this, Rob? I'm sorry, I did not.
It was a question around whether you were aware that there'd been any studies into whether it's likely to change the altitude levels with global warming, for example, warming the region.
Personally, I'm not aware of these studies, but this is a very valid question that we need to refer to the consortium. And I am quite convinced, I'm quite sure that the technical team is studying all of these issues, and eventually they will, if there's a need, I am quite convinced that they would allow to consider higher altitude. But at this moment, I am not familiar with these studies, and I'm not familiar with the consortium's deliberations on this matter. So I think it needs to be referred to the consortium. So
okay. Yeah, no,
I'm sorry about this.
No, it's still very good answers for what you can answer. A couple of questions on soil types. So again, I'll bring them together. So firstly, is there a preference of varietals in specific soil types? And also, is there a difference in quality levels with wines with different types of soil? So is there a higher quality soil or?
In Franciacorta, the key point is the diversity of the ripening conditions. And therefore, what is very important is that at this moment, I am not aware, to be frank, that there is a preference. So obviously, producers in Franciacorta are generally quite small. And so having a small holding, a small actor, not that many hectares of land, for some producer, it would be difficult to actually choose, okay, I prefer to plant here or plant there. But generally speaking, what they're looking for is a diversity of opportunities. So they like to plant Chardonnay in a cooler site, but also in a warmer site, because obviously Chardonnay would provide different, how should I say, different options for blending later. So at this moment, there is no real decision about these kind of preferences, because we make a Franciacorta, and the Franciacorta must represent the whole area.
Okay. Brilliant. Andrew has asked, at 1% of plantings, what does Herbamat contribute? And also, he's also asked if you made
what percent of planting?
Yeah, at 1% of plantings,
yes,
what does Herbamat contribute? And,
okay.
And he's also asked if you made a 100% Herbamat, what would its characteristics be?
Okay, this is very interesting. So in Franciacorta, at this moment, Herbamat is not allowed more than 10% in the blend. So it is less than 10%. So also in Franciacorta, the Pinot Bianco, the maximum allowed is 50%. So already there is this gives us a little bit of an intuition about the answer. So if we would make a wine from Herbamat that is 100%, first of all, it would be very difficult because the wine would have just too much acidity, and it would be difficult to balance completely this wine. And Herbamat is compatible to autolysis, but is not as much compatible as what Chardonnay is in terms of compatibility to autolysis. And so therefore, this is why I call the Chardonnay the queen, because Chardonnay basically is the favored grape for the blend. at this moment for obviously for the white wines and also for the even for the rosé. Chardonnay is recommended to be up to 65% for the rosé, and so therefore herba mate is contributing a lot of acidity, a lot of freshness, but this acidity would be just too high to make a wine in 100% sparkling wine.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Sarah asks, why is neutral aroma necessary?
This is an interesting point. Obviously, in a region where aromatic grape varieties are planted, like for example, being in Italy, it's the first one that comes to mind would be Asti, and Asti plants with Moscato Bianco, which is a highly aromatic grape variety. I believe that a producer, and I believe that the wine region today, these rules are created to optimize the positive and minimize the negative. What does that mean? We want to optimize the positive of a grape variety. So if we would make a wine with Moscato Bianco, for example, in Asti, when we use the Asti method, we do everything to optimize the floral aspect, the aromatic aspect of Moscato Bianco. Actually, there are some wines made with Moscato Bianco that are made in the traditional method. But when we use the traditional method to make a wine with Moscato, we actually tone down, we reduce the intensity of these aromas. So in a sense, we are not optimizing what Moscato Bianco can provide to the wine. So here in Franciacorta, what we want to do is we want to make a wine that is made with the traditional method. So we want to optimize the characteristic that we obtain from aging the wines on the lees. And so this characteristic that we obtain is this autolytic character, this biscuit, this brioche, this toast that we obtain. And if we would make a wine in the traditional method, perhaps, I'm only saying perhaps the idea would be that the aromatic character of this aromatic grape would then come in the way of hiding a little bit the autolytic character. And this would not be optimizing the method that we're using in Franciacorta. So when we have a neutral grape variety like Chardonnay, Pinot Bianco, Herba Mate, and even Pinot Nero.
JC?
Yeah, yeah. Are you there? Are we still there? Yes. Me, I am still here. And you?
Oh, he's back. We can hear you again, JC.
Okay, great. So basically what I was concluding is that when we have a neutral grape variety like Chardonnay, Pinot Nero, Pinot Bianco, Herba Mate, then we can really boost the benefit of the autolytic, the autolysis process. And this would be my answer to that question. I hope it was clear. Are you still there? I think we are losing each other. I don't understand why. I can see you. And I also can see other people, yes, on the. Okay. All right. Okay, very good. So perhaps, Rob, it is you who is not with us anymore. Okay, Rob will come. Sarah, so maybe I continue with the questions. I will try to choose. Okay, what do you mean precisely by autolysis compatibility? I think that this was answered in the answer with why do we need neutral aroma for the sparkling wine? Okay, the autolysis process. The ATM, okay, why the ATM pressure limit on Satèn? Actually, this is a very good question. Because this is a style. So basically, you see, when we make wine in the traditional method, we have many choices available in the wine production technique. So we could choose which grape variety we are going to put in the blend. We could choose also how long we're going to age the wine on the lees. But we also can choose how much liqueur de tirage we are going to put in the bottle. So basically, if we put a little bit of sweet wine and then some yeasts in the bottle, then we are going to be able to trigger the second fermentation in bottle. And so it becomes an interesting choice from the producer to decide, okay, if I put a little less sugar in the tirage, in the liqueur de tirage, then obviously I will have less pressure in the bottle. And if I have less pressure in the bottle, then I will make a different style than what is the traditional style, the more well-known style. And that style may actually please to a certain part of the market. And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that there are some consumers that are more sensitive to texture, to the bubbles themselves, and might appreciate very much less pressure like the Satin. So why we have a rule is to ensure that the Satin respect a certain typicity of style, and so we need to establish a kind of a limit, basically.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jesse, and thanks for carrying on there when my internet had a bit of a wobble. I think that's probably all the questions that we currently have time for. As we mentioned previously, if you do have further questions, please do send them in to us and we will get an answer over to you. But for now, all that's really left for me to do is to thank everybody for watching today from around the world. And also, if you're watching this on record at a later date, again, thank you for joining. Please subscribe to the Events Hub on YouTube and enable yourselves to be given this webinar and also future webinars. Thanks ever so much to JC for all of that expertise and knowledge. I can see that there's lots of thumbs up and love hearts and all the rest of it. So it looks like it's gone down really, really well. Thanks so much for that. Hopefully you all saw the feedback poll which popped up while I was temporarily offline. Please do complete the poll because it's really crucial for us to be able to see your feedback on our sessions. And finally, if this has inspired you to want to learn a little bit more about wine or take one of our courses, or if it's inspired you to potentially continue your journey to the next level in your own WSET journey, you can always find your local course provider on our Where to Study page, which is at wsetglobal.com. But thank you very much. And again, thanks, JC. Wonderful. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Welcome all to Franciacorta.
Thank you.